Hello and welcome. It's nice to see you with us. And so this afternoon, as you know, we're doing our webinar for you on delegation and strategic focus. We'll just allow a minute or so just for people to arrive in the room. And in the meantime, please make sure that you've got everything that makes you feel comfortable for this session so you can fully engage. My camera is not working brilliantly this afternoon. Apologies. Look like I'm in a tunnel, and a lot of familiar faces in there and some new ones as well. So whether you've been with us before or you haven't, it's lovely to have you with us. Thank you for joining us today. And so we'll just get started. So my name is Zoe Lewis. I think many of you know me. I am the founder and CEO of the Leadership Coaches. And as you know, we're running this series of webinars for you. And the idea of these webinars is that we cover a lot of topics with the content that comes up in our executive coaching. So mainly they are things that deal with moving up to board level. Typically, that's the level that we're coaching at most of the time. So you've probably already been to some of our sessions. I can see there's a lot of people that have. So last month we had decision making under pressure. And today we're looking at this key topic that comes up time and time again. How do I get used to delegating when I step up to that next level? And what do I do in order to make sure I can spend the time I need to spend on strategic focus rather than getting into the weeds? And I'm pleased to say that we're joined today by our coach, Sue Stockdale, who, as you probably know, is fantastic and has lots and lots of experience in terms of leadership coaching, lots and lots of books, lots of kudos to her because she's come from a fantastic background as one of the, I'm probably going to get it wrong, first woman to the North Pole, South Pole. You'll correct me, and you can do that as part of your introduction. So as we go through today's session, it is a webinar, so it's less interactive than our workshops if you've been on those before. But we do encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A, and at the end we've got some time where I'll pop back in and we'll do some Q&A with Sue at the end of the session. So I'm going to be quiet, hand over to Sue, and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Zoe. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Let me just put up the slides and we'll kick off. So as Zoe said, this afternoon today, I'm going to talk about delegation and strategic focus. And as she also mentioned in the introduction, I've been an executive coach for more than 2 decades, and I work with CEOs, senior leaders, executives in many countries around the world, and in many different industries. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about with people in coaching sessions is this question of delegation and strategic focus. So I hope that in the session today that you will either get a reminder of the things that you're already doing and doing well, or you'll get some new information that will enable you to be an even more effective leader. Before we get into thinking about delegation, well, I'd like you to reflect on your own experience of this. So think about a time when someone trusted you with something that really mattered, a project, a task, a responsibility. And it wasn't just something to do, but it was something that stretched you. And when you were given that responsibility, something shifted within you. You stepped up, you learned, you proved something to yourself. And maybe that experience was in the workplace, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was outside of the workplace. But I want you to hold on to that thought for a moment or two. Because I think in this context, it isn't about necessarily the experience when you are being delegated to. It's how did that leader create the experience for you so that you could grow? And that is really one of the great opportunities and challenges for leaders, is if you don't delegate well as a leader, you remain operational. And if you do delegate well, then you create capacity within your team for other people to think, to anticipate, to grow themselves. And so I hope you've all had a positive experience in the past of being delegated to and having that opportunity to grow, so that you really know what it's like from the recipient's side of things. Which brings me really on to think about what actually is the job of a leader. Now, I spoke to a CEO entrepreneur, Margaret Heffernan. She's a great writer, written many books, and also a speaker. And I asked her about what does she believe the job of a leader is. And on the screen, I don't know if you are listening or can see the slides, but I'll read to you what she said. And her primary focus, she believes, for a leader is for a leader to think. And that, yes, leaders are known for taking action, but it's pointless and dangerous to take action if it's not preceded by deep and difficult thinking. And she says thinking is what leaders are paid for and what their colleagues expect them to do. But it is hard to think alone, because for any of us, the mind wanders. we're all tempted to reflect on what's easy and comforting and avoid sometimes the hard, complex problems that leaders have to face. Now, that's what I find in coaching sessions with clients, that they really value that thinking space so that they can get the thinking done around the issues that really matter for them in that safe space. So I invite you to think about that. What do you think about the job of a leader is for you? When was the last time, of course, that you made space consciously in your diary in a given day to do the deep and perhaps difficult thinking before taking action? And you might think, well, what's that got to do with strategic focus, Sue, and delegation? Well, if we think about it like this, most leaders don't struggle with delegation because they're bad at it. They often struggle with delegation because they haven't done the thinking before that delegation requires. They haven't thought about the things that only they should be doing, or they haven't thought about the outcomes that really matter. They haven't thought about the trust elements, perhaps, or the capability elements of their team members, or the risk factors. And so leaders often default to doing because it's easier. Now, of course, that isn't getting stuff off your plate as a leader. And so that's why thinking, if we act without thinking, it can lead to this poor delegation, micromanagement, and overload. So what I find that is really important to reflect upon from a leadership perspective is, how do you make space to do the thinking that's necessary? Now, in the title of this webinar, delegation is only half the story, because the other half is about strategic focus, the opportunities that delegation opens up for a leader. And if we think about these elements, you can see on the slide here, I just propose that there are 5 aspects to strategic focus. The first aspect is direction. Now, in that context, what I mean is, have you as a leader been clear enough so that other people can act without you being there? Now, many people find, and including myself here, we often think that setting direction is when we say something once that everybody will remember it. Well, of course, sometimes direction has to be repeated, and it has to be set and give an opportunity for people to come back with questions or understanding to ensure that they're really clear about what is the direction of the business or the department or the area of responsibility that you as a leader have. One of the things that these days, when changes in organizations happen so fast, is, and I've seen this with several leaders that I've coached, is that they lose the sense of what is the direction, because today's direction was different from yesterday's direction, and then it flip-flops. And if they're not clear about what the priorities are, then how can their team be clear? Clarity of direction, I think, is a key part of strategic focus. And then the second thing is about creating the conditions. Can you as a leader, do you as a leader create the environment and the conditions where the work of your team can actually happen effectively? So that means then, do you enable people to have the right access to resources and information that's going to enable them to deliver the task that you want them to do? Have they got adequate time and space to do the work? Do they feel psychologically safe? Without all of this thinking about the conditions, the conducive conditions to deliver that work, then delegation can sometimes become abdication. The next point is around decisions. So are you clear, and others people are clear about the decisions that you hold and the decisions that you release and delegate to others? So what can often happen is people delegate part of a job, part of the decisions, but they hold on to the bits that they want to keep control of, and then they become the bottleneck and everything slows down because the leader will not delegate the appropriate decisions to their teams. And then we think about influencing. If a leader's job is to support their team to deliver, they also, I believe, have a responsibility to clear the path, to make it easy for their team to deliver. And that might be around who else needs to be aligned in order for this project, this task, this mission to succeed, and have you as a leader engage those people. So that's often about that influencing peers, stakeholders, people higher up in the organization. Your results might fail, your team's results might fail because of lack of buy-in elsewhere within an organization. So when people hit resistance, the job of a leader is often to have done that influencing and engagement ahead of time. And then lastly, the opportunity for feedback and learning. So if you delegate a task to somebody else, it's an opportunity for them to learn and grow, which may mean then, how do you conduct an activity to help them to get feedback, first of all, and how do you and the entire team learn from the experience of delegation? So those are the opportunities that leaders have to step into that strategic focus and pay attention to those areas that you can see on the slide. Now, I always like to have conversations myself with leaders and to think, well, how do they apply these things in practice? And one of the leaders that I had the opportunity to speak with a couple of years ago now was Dame Catherine Granger. Now, she is or was an Olympic rower, a gold medalist, former chair of UK sport here in Britain, and now a member of the House of Lords. And I asked her about what it means for her to be a leader. And here is part of what she said. If I feel I'm being too involved as a leader, I have to check myself and step back a little, because the only way that I can really add value is to be creative and challenge, is to be dispassionate. And what she said to me is, I think my job, Sue, is about seeing the connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information and put that all together. Now, that might mean as a leader that I need to take time to read the newspaper when I'm traveling, meet a broad range of people from different backgrounds to get different perspectives. And she sees very much that if she gets too involved in the day-to-day, then she's not going to really be able to add value as much as she can, because it's her job, she sees, is to bring the inputs from these other worlds, other perspectives. And for those on the webinar here, it might be different departments, it might be different aspects of the industry that you operate in. How do you integrate that information into your job to ensure that direction that you're heading in is the one that is most appropriate at the time? So this slide here is about really what it takes to move from doer to direction setter. And this model, the logical levels of change that Robert Dilts created, we've adapted it here to really highlight this aspect of identity shift. So if we start at the lower level, level 5 at the bottom of this pyramid, the things that are readily seen on a day-to-day basis. We see people operating, we see people behaving in the particular environment that they're in. And then if they move up the levels, the next opportunity for change is about developing skills and capabilities. And at those levels, I'm sure we've all had an opportunity over the years in our lives and work to experience this, that people go off on a training course to learn a new skill, level 4 on the diagram, and then they come back to work and they don't change their behaviour. Why is that? Well, very often because the obstacle to change lies higher up in this diagram, in levels 1, 2, or 3. Beliefs and values, identity, and purpose. And that is what I spend 95% of my time working on with the leaders in a coaching conversation, because it's often the beliefs that they currently hold that from the past that really no longer serve them now as they've developed in their leadership capability. And I'll explain a bit more about this in a moment or two. It might be their identity. Do they see themselves as a leader? What do they believe the role of a leader is? And what do they think their purpose is? So that's where the real change takes place. The grey blocks in this pyramid, blocks 4 and 5, is what we readily see on a day-to-day basis. What we don't see, but yet drives anybody's behaviour, is what they think their purpose is, how they see themselves in terms of their identity, and what their beliefs and values are. So taking this forward then into that mindset shift, that identity shift. And what I'm saying here is leaders don't really change their behavior at the lower level of that diagram until they change the story they're telling themselves about who they are. So when we're operating as a manager in an organization, if we think about it, our responsibility is about productivity and results. Move up to the role of a leader. The leader's role is to become an enabler of a team to deliver results. And that's where people often struggle with their identity, because their sense of self-worth, their sense of value has come from delivering stuff. And what they're being invited to do when they move up to a leadership position is to let that go and actually deliver something else, if you like, become the role of an enabler so that the team deliver the results. So leaders often struggle with, well, who am I then if I'm not doing stuff, if I'm not delivering stuff? Who am I if I'm just an enabler? And so what stops them changing and adapting are these common stories. See which ones you might identify with, because I'm sure there will be some that may be familiar to you. Well, I'll not delegate because it's quicker if I do it. I'll delegate when things settle down, so sometime in the future, but not today. I'll delegate, well, my team is already too busy and it's unfair to give them more. Well, my team don't have the skills or experience required. They won't do it to the same standard as me. They might do it better than me, so I don't really want to have that to happen. If I delegate this, I will lose control. Or I actually enjoy doing this, so I'll just keep it. So as you just listened to me share those stories, or you see them on the screen there, perhaps just take a moment to identify which stories sometimes you might tell yourself to justify not delegating. Well, back to this point about really understanding what drives behaviour. And another leader that I interviewed, Robert Gass from the Rockwood Leadership Institute, he says trying to change behaviour usually fails if you don't look at what drives that behaviour. And hence, in a coaching conversation, what we're doing, Zoe and my other colleagues, we're doing is creating that safe space so that a leader can come into a coaching conversation and they can feel that they're not being judged. And then they can examine their behaviour more carefully and really understand what's driving their behaviour that maybe isn't serving them today, and what could they do differently in order to be more effective as a leader. So let's think about what's really going on. These are some of the stories, again, that we're saying to ourselves. Well, the I'm the only one that can do narrative really might be about perfectionism and pride. Well, I better not do it. I'll protect the team. That could be about guilt and empathy. The I love it, so I don't want to give it away could be about identity and our passions. Well, it's more efficient if I do it myself. Well, maybe that's a story about time and effort. Security and control, I don't want to give it up, could be about risk and ego. And well, no one's ready to take this on yet. Perhaps really what's going on is lack of trust. So it's about changing one's mindset, reframing the story that we're telling ourselves from a leadership perspective. For example, from I add value by knowing to I add value by growing others' thinking. Now, I had a recent client, just to give you an example of this, who came into the conversations and who said, well, I need to have all the answers before I go into a meeting. I want to have certainty, and I don't want to have things that are going to be unclear. And when we really began to unpick this, they realized that they were limiting their team's opportunity to grow and develop. And they realized that if they didn't just know everything, but actually, rather than having the right answers, that they had the right questions to ask to enable their team to think, that was going to enable their team to grow and develop as well. And that then changed their mindset about what it meant to be a leader. The I'm the only one that can do this properly narrative, it might be about, well, if I'm the only one, I've built fragility, not strength in my team. And the hidden driver here might be about control and identity. I value my knowledge. I don't want to let that go. It could be about ego. And therefore, the result is that there are bottlenecks and your team depend on you and don't have an opportunity to grow themselves. Changing the efficiency myth. Well, it will take too long to explain, so I'll just keep a hold of this myself. Well, it might be that if I coach my team once, if I ask them questions, well, that will save addressing it multiple times. There's also might be an acceptance here that if I ask a question, yes, it takes longer now. However, that time will be saved in the future. And also maybe acceptance of mistakes, an acceptance that things may not be perfect first time, but over time, person that you want to delegate to can learn. Well, people have got enough on. The protecting the team narrative. How about changing that, reframing that to shielding people from stretch limits their growth. The security and control story. Well, if you hear yourself saying, if I loosen my grip, standards will slip. Well, how about reframing that? Control creates bottlenecks. Clarity creates accountability. So how can a leader begin to trust their team more rather than micromanaging? Or I love it being hands-on. Maybe a reframe there would be leading means letting go of my preferences in order to grow others. So it's getting that bigger perspective as a leader. How do you enable more than just yourself? And then lastly, well, I'll delegate when they're ready, but it's not today. My team will become ready because I delegate. And the impact, that fear of risk of giving people an opportunity, it means that there's no stretch and no development. So as I've whizzed through these beliefs, maybe one or two of them are resonating with you. So here's a question for you to reflect on. What belief is stopping me from stepping into my leadership? And what action can I take to own it? Now, it is hard to sometimes examine our beliefs and really be honest with ourselves as to what stops us changing. Again, that can be the very opportunity within a coaching conversation to have that safe space to talk those through those aspects through with another person. So here is an exercise that I invite you to think about. How do you actually spend your time? What is your current reality in terms of the balance between strategic focus and delegation? So here are 4 areas that I invite you to reflect upon: leading, managing, individual action, and coaching others. So you can see there the categories which I described earlier on around what leadership means. With that future focus, setting direction, inspiring your team, thinking, motivating them, influencing others. Maybe it's about creating the vision, overcoming the challenges that are getting in the way for your team to deliver the results. Managing, well, it's challenging the status quo, that should say, actually. It's slightly odd with the words there. It's not maintaining a status quo. And then encouraging your team and making sure that they learn and adapt. So that's the activity of leading. The second column there is about productivity. How much time do you spend helping your team to implement things? How do you control, organize, delegate, instruct, and so on? Now then there's the results, and that can often be the things that you're just doing for yourself, the following procedures, delivering, creating a report, whatever it might be, things that you just do yourself. And then there's how do you take responsibility for performance and learning within your team, that job of manager, leader as coach. So I want you to reflect. If you've got a bit of paper in front of you, or you're something to write upon or look at, I'd like you to just ratio up your time, about how much time you spend in each aspect of the work there. Here's an example: 15% of my time leading, 55% being a manager, 20% doing the individual tasks, and 10% coaching my team. So I'll just go back one moment to show you those categories again so that you can reflect upon them. I've got leading, we've got managing, we've got action, individual action, and we've got coaching others. Now, I often start a coaching conversation with a leader, helping them to reflect on this reality. And once you come up with your ratio, my question to them always is, well, how would you like that to be different? And consistently, leaders want to increase the leadership, increase the coaching, reduce the managing, and reduce the individual action. And I find that that's normally the way the spread that it goes, not always. So that's a good start point to give yourself an area of focus. So how do you do less managing, do more leading? How do you perhaps take less individual action and do more coaching of others? Now that's your perspective on how you're using your time. Another really important thing about coaching and being able to get greater self-awareness as a leader is to step into the shoes of others. So I invite you to think about, well, what do other people see you do? How would they evaluate you against those 4 areas? Now that might be looking at it from your manager's perspective. How does your manager observe you spending your time? What do they think you might be doing in those 4 areas? What do your peers observe? Do they see you spending more time in one area than another? What if you asked your team members? What would they say? And maybe other stakeholders. And by doing that, by getting other perspectives, it gives you, it either reconfirms your own sense of self, or you're able to perhaps see that your intentions might be getting interpreted differently from other perspectives in your organisation. Well, you might be listening to this and thinking, well, it's okay, Sue. Yes, I want to delegate to others, but how do I do that? Well, for me, I think there are 5 aspects to effective delegation. The first thing is about how clear you are about delegating what the outcome is, what good looks like. Now, I'll just give a practical example here. If you were a leader and said to one of your team members, well, I need you to produce this report by Friday, and they then say, yes, I'll get that done. And then on Thursday afternoon, you get it back, and of course, it's completely not what you wanted. And so then in the old days, we might get a red pen out and mark up the printed copy of the report. Of course, on computers, it's different today. But that sense of, well, they haven't done it right. They haven't done it like I imagined it would be. Did you actually explain what the context was? Is this report for the board, for example? And what would good look like if the board were getting the report? Is it for an external audience, and what might they expect? Is it a 1 page? Has it got visuals? What's the font size to be used? Is there a house style? What type of language is appropriate? Now, all of that, leaders often have in their own heads. And what they don't do is think that through and clearly express that to the person that they're delegating to. And hence, then their time gets demanded time and time again to redefine or to even just explain what good looks like. If a leader was thinking about that, maybe they would ask their team member, well, what do you need from me in order to deliver to this outcome that I've just explained? So maybe it's about using questions. So is this contracting with the other person, explaining why that task or activity matters? What decisions can they make, and which bits do you have authority for? When are you expecting them to check in, and what are the boundaries here? So what's their latitude for being taking responsibility themselves? And then lastly, what sort of feedback loop are you going to have in the conversation with them? So you might be listening to this and thinking, well, yeah, fair enough, Sue, yeah, I do all that already, but actually my team don't want to accept the responsibility that I'm offering to them. So maybe there's other questions that you can explore in that context. Have you been clear enough as a leader to explain what the outcomes were? Who's taking the decisions? Have I created the right conditions for them? Have you explored the degree of motivation that your team member has? What other jobs that they have on? Do they believe they can step up and deliver what you want? Maybe it's about adjusting your support, not taking the job back, but just ensuring that you're able to be there enough to help that person, to help them to reinforce any learning that's needed. And very often then to be clear on the boundaries. So what does ownership look like from their perspective versus yours? And then, of course, modeling accountability. Do you encourage them when you see they have taken initiative to do something? Do they get a sense of that is something that you really want them to take on? And if things go wrong, how do you resist blaming them, but perhaps ask questions like, well, what happened? What should you do differently next time? What do I need to do differently next time? What support might help you to step up fully? And then reinforce that it's still their responsibility. I'm going to back you to own this. So how can we make sure that we get the result that we need without taking back that responsibility? One of the ways, again, just a visual that I always find quite helpful for this is the challenge and support matrix that you may have come across before, these 4 different areas. So if we started at bottom left, where somebody is given low support and has low challenge, then that often leads to disengagement. People don't feel that they're being held accountable. And then if you provide too much support, that can lead to dependency, when that's maybe the self-talk from a leader to say, I don't want to overload my team. So the team then are so supported that they don't get an opportunity to stretch. To the bottom right, to anxiety, high challenge, low support, a leader might be saying, well, they need to step up. This is a stretch opportunity. And then they don't offer the necessary safety net to give that person the opportunity to take on that challenge without feeling too anxious. And then lastly, and often the ideal here is to take high challenge and high support, and to encourage people to operate in that way. Now, I remember once a team that I was leading, there was a member of the team who had a lot of talents and capabilities, but they didn't believe in themselves to take on stretch goals. Now, one of the ways that I took to help them to take on that ownership and to grow was an opportunity arose because I ended up being ill on a particular occasion where I had to facilitate a meeting. And I knew this other person was very capable of doing so. And I also knew if I'd given them too much time to think about it, they would become too anxious. And so it was on the morning, when I contacted them and said, I can't facilitate this meeting anymore, and I'd really like you to do it. I've seen you do this in many other situations, not at this level with these people. However, I've seen you have the capability. I believe in you. Are you willing to do it on this occasion? And they nodded and said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I said, I really want you to grow. I'd love you just to take this opportunity to try it out. And sure enough, they did a brilliant job. And they then left feeling much more confident about taking on stretch opportunities in the future. And that was, for me, that based on the judgment about their willingness to take on ownership, but not become too anxious about the situation. So when teams don't necessarily take responsibility, of course, there's a consequence to that. And that means then sometimes leaders do step in to solve those short-term problems. They do lose the long-term perspective. And teams then mistake busyness for, or a leader mistakes being busy for actually leading the organization. So being strategic and taking on that strategic focus does require very often people to have fewer priorities and to take clear ownership for situations. So this is the mindset for me that leaders choose to accept, in accepting that leadership is about becoming an enabler. So again, just listen to these phrases and reflect from your own perspective how many of these phrases you accept or whether you have a different perspective. So as a leader, I can't control everything. I cannot control everything. I accept that I will not be liked by everybody because sometimes I might be making tough decisions. Mistakes are part of growth. So how do we tolerate things going wrong? I'm accountable for outcomes, not every action. So the clearer we are with an outcome, then the easier it is for somebody else then to take responsibility for those actions, as long as they know what the outcome is. Change is constant. I cannot do it all alone. Hence, leader of a team. Conflict is a natural part of leadership. How do we handle conflict within our team? I, as a leader, am not defined by my successes or failures. I need to prioritize energy over busyness. Again, another conversation I spend a lot of time with leaders talking about is how do they utilize their energy most effectively? At what times of the day are they doing certain activities? When are they doing their best thinking? When are they doing the tasks that perhaps need less energy and are more repetitive? Managing their energy is a really critical part of being a leader. Vulnerability builds trust. How willing are you as a leader to just demonstrate and display a little bit of vulnerability? I can't please all stakeholders at all times. Learning never stops, and saying no is part of leadership. So those are just some phrases again for you to reflect upon. Do you adopt that mindset from a leadership perspective? So let's give you an example of this. Mindset drives behavior. I worked with one leader who had a propensity for wanting to be liked. They wanted to be part of the team. They didn't want to give negative feedback to anybody. So they hesitated when doing so. And as a result, the team didn't feel that they were being held accountable and they missed deadlines. I asked the leader, what is more important for you? To be liked or to be respected? And they hadn't really considered this, what it would mean to be respected. And when we talked it through, they realized that that meant perhaps having tougher conversations and holding their team more accountable. So what we did is we worked through how they, first of all, took control themselves of their own boundaries. And they were more disciplined in managing their diary and putting in blocks of time for doing strategic thinking and setting up regular one-to-one meetings with their team. And then they were disciplined in holding their team to account at those meetings. They didn't cancel them or change them. And very soon their team realized that this manager now meant business and he was serious at holding them accountable. That in turn then actually encouraged them, the team, to change their behavior as well. The leader used more questions. He began to use the power of silence in his one-to-one meetings, leaving that silence to invite the member of the team to respond with what was really going on. And he also emphasized in those one-to-one meetings his belief in their capability. And so by the end of that experience, taking that small step, reframing his mindset, he began to get an improvement in performance from his team. So I invite you to reflect on your beliefs about being a leader, and then maybe from there, take some small steps forward. It could be one task from today that you commit to stop doing that would free you up to be more strategic. It might be one decision that you will push down to your team so that you encourage them to take responsibility for a particular action, or a capability that you recognize that has potential within one of your team members, and you will take steps to intentionally grow that within them. This being strategic and delegating really fit into just some of the most common coaching issues, because I know that many of the leaders that I've worked with over the years often think about, well, what are leaders spending time talking about in coaching sessions? And these really are the 5 that I spend most of my time with senior leaders talking about. How is it that they influence other people? Part of that core responsibility for leadership. Being strategic, we've talked about that today. Clarifying their bigger purpose. How can they make it a bigger impact as a leader within their organization and sometimes within their lives? Of course, work-life balance, sometimes not balance, but just getting perspective more on that. And then delegating more. So just to round off my reflections today about delegation and strategic focus, we've talked about delegation, we've talked about challenge and support, and about creating that space for other people to grow. But really, beneath it all, I hope that you leave reflecting about this fundamental shift in mindset, about identity. Are you somebody who's standing in the right place as a leader, Are you standing inside the system within your organization and you get pulled into all the detail and the immediacy and the problem solving and effectively can become the bottleneck or the safety net? Or are you the leader that's stepped outside the system, that can stand there to set the direction, to create the conditions, to influence others in the organization and outside so that your team can deliver the results? So effectively you move from being operational to becoming effectively the architect within your business, within your organization. Think about is what more do I need to do? Is where am I standing? And from that position, can I help my team grow in the future? Because the leaders that really create the impact that I've seen over the years as a coach are the ones that aren't necessarily doing the most. It's the ones who've chosen to become a really effective enabler of their team. So thank you for listening. I will stop sharing now and hand back to Zoe. And if you do have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Hi, so thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. So much good, rich content in there. I was just making notes as you were talking, right from the examples that you gave of the clients that you work with and also your own lived experiences. Lots of case studies, lots of pragmatic transferable skills, which I think is one of those things that we come across time and time again in the feedback from these, is that I really want something I can take and actually put into practice. And I think you delivered that today. Superb knowledge. Thank you. I can't see any questions, but I always preempt there's some clapping for you as well. Superb. I always preempt a few questions or think about some questions that we typically hear. So one of the things that we've just done some research on is the leadership gap, and we're finding increasingly leaders not necessarily wanting to move up the ranks, and particularly a gap in the middle tiers. And so where I think that we might have a challenge, and we hear the challenge, is actually it's not that I don't want to delegate, it's that I've got no one to delegate to because nobody's stepping into those roles. And forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't think that was on the slides, but if not, if it was, I apologise. So have you got any thoughts on that?
The first thing that comes to my mind, Zoe, as you say that, is risk and reward. And I wonder whether that can be sometimes the obstacle that does stop people perceiving that they want to move up to the next level, because sometimes they want the reward, whether that's a financial reward or a recognition reward to move up. But the potential risk as they perceive it limits their desire to do so. And so I just invite people to then think about how one can reframe the risk and set a context about what's a perceived risk versus what's a real risk. And to just reframe risk versus opportunity. So, I haven't got the answer to those two questions. Mm-hmm. I do think it's about looking at both perspectives to have a more balanced viewpoint before then thinking about that decision. And from a leadership perspective, then maybe also inviting team members to think about those questions so that they can get more money, they can have a greater impact, and they can move through the organization. And what are some of are the risks that they're perceiving real risks? And what if they are an effective leader, how can they support their team to be willing to take that step into the unknown? Because that effectively what it is.
Yes, yeah. I think that those are good tips, and definitely, again, I think that those things are coming up, aren't they, about how do I see the people that have gone through this experience before me, and in terms of the leadership pathways, if I see more people like me who've made it to board, then they've trodden that path first that was perhaps similar to mine. And traditionally, we're hearing like the people who go from the shop floor or the sweeping, cleaning right the way through to CEO, and I think that those sort of stories really do inspire the next generation of leaders as well.
One thing, if I could just add to what I've said, Zoe, is I remember facilitating a board conversation where the team, the CEO was there and the team members, and I asked everybody in the room to share what they perceived as strengths that they admired in other people around them, and what came consistently out from everybody in the room, apart from the CEO, was everybody wanted to know why the CEO. They seem to be really good at steering the conversation, bringing in other people into a conversation so they didn't just drive everything themselves, and being willing to sort of choose their battles, what things they would put a lot of energy into and what things they wouldn't. And then, so the CEO explained his thinking. And he said, well, I don't believe I'm the person with all the answers in the room here. I believe all of you have got more knowledge than I have. So hence I want to bow to you when I'm chairing a meeting. I want to get you involved. And I always come at what I'm doing by playing the long game. And I will then consciously think, I'll let that point go because it doesn't serve me to pick up on it in particular. So what I'm really getting at here is he explained the reality of his thinking about being CEO. Now, what that did for everybody else in the room is they began to then think, so now I understand how a CEO thinks. In a way, maybe I could do that myself. It doesn't seem quite so scary now. It's a bit like doing your exam, your maths exam, and you get asked a question and then you give the answer. But the real value is in the working out, showing the working out. How did I get to that answer? And I think if there's leaders listening here and they're thinking, well, how can I inspire my team to step up and not have that gap? Do more of that sharing why you're doing what you're doing. I'm asking that person this question because I want to bring them into this conversation. I believe they have got, whatever it might be, is how do you show you're working out? Because that's the very thing that will inspire other people to fill that gap.
Superb. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've just made me think of one of our clients who I think does this really well. They do exco stories as well. And particularly one comes to mind where they had somebody who was neurodivergent, got to board, and they were like, I'm really nervous about this. And once they'd gone through their journey of coaching, and typically, working through their challenges, one of the things they did was actually do one of the exco lives and talked about their experience and how they use that as their superpower to get through the challenges that they faced as well. So I think hearing other people's stories, living it vicariously first can really help. Superb. Thank you. We've got a comment, not a question as such, but very pertinent content based on some conversations I've been having this week to try and help someone delegate. Okay, useful, timely. Thank you. So no other questions, but actually there's one comment. Let me just see if I've missed something in there. Oh, no, we're okay. But we have a little bit of time left. So another question I thought of, and this is my last one. So if others have got questions, pop them in the Q&A. I think because it's delegation and strategic focus, we hear the challenge of, I can do the delegation bit, but I'm scared or I am unsure about strategic focus. And increasingly, in fact, you were on our webinar for our own CPD earlier this week, where we talked about the changing world and what's coming up. And particularly if we start to think about things like enterprise leadership, how are we doing things in a new way, strategic direction for the unknown future. I wondered if you've got any tips or thoughts you share on how people overcome those challenges.
Yeah, again, a great and important question, Zoe. I think it comes back to, I think I made a point earlier on about Dame Catherine Granger, who said, I need to get out into the world and I need to understand how other people do things. And that takes time. And that, for me, is how we can learn. When we've got an unknown, I always ask leaders this when they come and bring a particular challenge. One of my first questions to them always is, who do you know that's done that before? Where could you find out this information? And it's rare that it's not often an unknown. There's normally some way of a thread that can start your journey of exploration to understand that kind of new world. And so that, for me, is part of that job of a leader. If there's time to do that, to go to events, to network with industry leaders, to understand what's going on out there in the world, then that's what freeing up your time gives you when you're not delegating. It's looking upwards and outwards that will then help somebody to make sure that the unknown isn't quite as scary and they can get data in from other places.
Yeah, some good examples there. And I think also we see people where they say, actually, I still don't know what's coming up. I've got nobody in my organization. And sometimes the question is, so exactly as you said, who would know? And it's people outside of the organization. So I'm thinking of one of our banking clients that I worked with at senior level, and it was helping them progress too. Actually, if you come outside of your organization, where else can you get it? And they realized there were lots of networks that were there that they weren't tapping into because they were just staying so held in their business, thinking they were being loyal, but actually that was trapping them going out and finding the information they needed to create longer term strategy.
That's the one thing that I've spent, in my career, a lot of time and effort on is making sure that I can learn from diverse worlds and things that you would think are completely unrelated to the business context. You can get learning from that and bring it into the business context and vice versa. I think it's one of the private schools, Eton, I think it is, when they were recruiting drama teachers, is they didn't go to other schools to find other drama teachers. They went into the world of theatre and said, who can we take that has skills in that environment, and we can teach them the necessary things for teaching, but we want people with skills from kind of an unrelated world. So I think the range, and there's a great book, Range, but I'm looking at it here, David Epstein, his book, he talks about that in terms of how do we become broad and a broader understanding across more than just one area. So a bit like if you were asking somebody from medical term, if you asked a knee surgeon how to fix your arm, if you're so specialist on knees, you say, well, I don't know anything about arms. But if you understand more broadly about the body, then you can adapt to do something about the arm in a metaphorical sense.
Very good. Lovely. And a great book share there as well. Thank you so much. And for those of you that are wondering, when we do a webinar, after the webinar, you get a follow-up, and we've also got an aid memoir with some of the key points from today's session included. And if you'd like to just jot in the Q&A area, because we don't have a chat function available just now, your thoughts and your feedback on today's session. So what's gone well for you? What's the things were you expecting that maybe we haven't delivered for you, because we can learn from all of these events. And we've got a whole load of webinars planned, but there's probably more that you think, actually, I'd like to know X, Y, and Z. If you've got those thoughts as well, please pop those into the comments. And just from me to you, Sue, thanks. That was really insightful. I can see how much effort you put into the preparation, and I know that you enjoy these sessions, but I'm sure that the audience got a lot from it too. So thank you again. Much appreciated.
Thanks,
and for everyone else, I can see we've got a real mix of people on the audience. So half of you are our clients already, and the other half aren't. So if you're already our clients, thank you so much. And if there's anything that's resonated with you today, drop me a line. If you're not and you're curious to know more how you tap into executive coaching, feel free to drop me a line as well. You can just simply reply to the information that we send out to you, which I think will be either tomorrow, or what day are we tomorrow? Friday, or early next week, most likely by the time we get the recording. So the recording will be on YouTube as well. So from us to you, thank you for attending. Thank you for engaging. And if there's anything you want to follow up, feel free to connect with us. Thank you very much. And we're all done for today. Thank you.